Good afternoon, everyone. We will now call the Audit and Finance Committee for what's today, February the 4th, 2025 to order. The first item is going to be the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Point of information.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Stamp.
So, the audit, and at that point, that question could not be introduced because
It wasn't on any agenda.
and you were supposed to put something on the agenda so that.
I remember.
So, but I don't see anything on the agenda.
About the, Mr. Prentice.
Something on the agenda.
I remember. Mr. Prentice.
We can follow up offline about that, but the audit's been presented to the Board of Trustees, and it was shared, the readout from the auditor was shared with the Audit and Finance Committee back in December. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but the audit's on the website. The audited financial statements are on the website.
Well,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
my question
Mhm.
really was around, because I think it's the purpose of this committee is to follow the corrective actions. So while the audit report may be on the website, I think it's important that we have an update as to what the status of the corrective actions taken.
I think we went over that. Mr. Prentice, do you want to speak directly to that?
They've both been addressed. There were two corrective actions in the FY24 audit. One was related to procurement surrounding ESSER. And as I've mentioned in the board meeting and in audit and finance, there was termination of staff in one office in particular, and a right sizing of that process in the procurement office. It's all been addressed when it comes to expenditure of federal funds and procurement. And then the second one was related to the posting of payments from Medicaid. They were reimbursements that came in. They were posted as revenue in certain circumstances last year. And so the budget office has been informed of the proper SOP and they recoded those transactions, but there were no other corrective actions.
I still think my point is being missed. The fact is that there should be a formal presentation.
It was given as a formal presentation.
So we
As to what is the status of these corrective actions.
Mhm.
First, what is your plan? Once the plan is in place, then at each of these meetings, we should be updated as to the corrective actions taken
I
and where they are. And
I
so
think-
all of this verbal communication is fine, but I don't think it addresses my question and my.
and maybe I'm not thoroughly understanding what it is that you're asking, but I did go through rigorous questioning of that particular part of the audit and process. I especially drilled in on the point of potential fraud and criminal actions that were taken. So I feel like I was very thorough in my questioning. But if I'm missing something, and then, even the woman that was here presenting it from the audit firm said that everything had been addressed.
But both of Mr. Growski's got his hand up. I apologize.
Yeah, because I'm thinking it's a point of order, what Ms. Stamp is requesting. And so, and
If the rules were followed.
right. So the audit was presented and now what we have is follow-up questions were being asked. So as a point of order, I think it's easy for us today to amend the agenda before it's approved to allow you to publicly address it so that it is recorded as being an item on the agenda, and then you can answer whatever questions come back. You follow it? So I would make a
Well,
motion.
I was already considering that action, but I first wanted to clarify what it is that she was asking.
Well, I don't know how much more clear I can be. It's just a process.
Right.
It's part of the audit process.
Mhm.
So if you read that audit report, it's probably a section in there that addresses the corrective action.
Specifically what they're
county
doing to
has-
correct the things that were
county has to
found.
Present a corrective action plan.
Mhm.
My point is that it's the responsibility from what I read and what our purpose is here. It's our responsibility to ensure that when you have audit findings, that the corrective action, we agree with the corrective action plan that's been put in place, but we follow it until we're satisfied. So yes, it's all well and good for you to say, but we've done X, Y, and Z, but we need
I
that
think
demonstrated.
I think I understand what you're asking now, because I did ask about that specifically. So I think what she's asking, Mr. Prentice, and if, please correct me if I'm wrong, is she would like a detailed report about the corrective actions that were taken and the process the district is now going through to adhere to those suggestions and corrective actions that we took. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just, to me, it should be an agenda item. When you have an audit and it has
Mhm.
findings,
Can-
that should
can-
always be
Can
an
we,
agenda
can we
item,
follow
so we're
up with that
satisfied.
and go through that?
I
At the-
I am happy to present that information at any point in time. There is a corrective action plan in the audit at the back in the compliance section. And I think the only point that I would make is that during the presentation of the audited financial statements, both the plan and the corrective action that had been taken was presented. And in those case of both of those findings, the corrective action was not it was taken and there wasn't any further ongoing corrective action to take because there had been a change to SOP. And so the audit that was accepted by the board included resolution of both of those corrective actions. And that was also presented to the Audit and Finance Committee by the auditors and discussed by staff. So I'm happy to discuss it to any degree that we need to and expound upon it if the committee, if the will of the committee is to amend the agenda to discuss the audit. But it's just those two items specifically pertaining to procurement with federal programs and the posting of revenue associated with Medicaid.
Yeah, I also remember thoroughly addressing those and what the district was doing, but I think maybe she's finding some place like presented like in writing about what was found and what was done. So,
The last time we met, or when that was presented, the county had not finalized, at least that's what was told, that they had not finalized their corrective action plan. So I don't remember, I remember the audit being presented, the findings being presented, but as far as the corrective action plan
mhm.
that was to be put in place,
I think
that
maybe
was not.
I specifically asked about that. So maybe I don't want to say go back and rewind it, because I mean, I specifically asked about that and everything had been resolved at the point that that audit was come and presented.
But Madam Chairman, that's why I raised the point of order, because the point of order is that rather than having this discussion like we're having right now, it's simply let's amend the motion and address all the concerns of the committee and move forward.
Okay, then
I'll make,
go for it.
so I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to include an item. I think where we would put it. It's not an action item. It's definitely, it'd be an amend item 3, which is information items, to add an item 3F to include a follow-up to the presentation on the audit that was presented in December.
Sure.
But I think what she was asking is she doesn't want it done verbally, which has already been done. She wants a formal presentation.
But I
Is that
agree,
correct?
but a point of order is, all I'm doing is she can
Yeah,
ask
the
for it, but
agenda.
it's on the record. That's
Yeah.
Okay,
so
alright.
what happens at the end? Who knows? So the motion is to amend to add an item 3F to the information so that we can address this.
At least we can discuss it.
Was there a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Motion to
so the motion to adopt the agenda with an additional agenda item 3F to discuss the findings and corrective actions of the audit is it moving forward. The next item is 1C, approval of the minutes for January 7th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
Approved.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm abstaining since I wasn't there.
Okay. The next item is 2A Head Start, Early Head Start. Ms. Foxworth, I see you. Would you like to come up and present your item to us?
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Watley, Board Chair Drabowski, board members, Audit and Finance members, and Superintendent Huggins. The CCSD Head Start funding application is submitted annually on March 1st to the Office of Head Start approval by both of our governing boards, the CCSD Board of Trustees and the Head Start Policy Council are required. I'm here to present the 25-26 Head Start, Early Head Start budget. Some key components that you'll find in the budget is number one, keeping all Head Start and Early Head Start instructional staff and family advocates on the CCSD salary scale, including any proposed compensation adjustment that may be passed as part of the CCSD budget process. Funding to approve of build a trained pool of substitutes that are all cleared by the Department of Social Services. And this funding is used to increase the daily rates for substitutes in Head Start. Funding is also being requested as part of the budget to participate in professional development on the pyramid framework. The pyramid framework is a research based model of addressing challenging behaviors and promoting pro-social behaviors in early childhood classrooms. And of course, we continue to focus on maintaining our funded enrollment and work towards being fully staffed. A consistent instructional workforce is our focus this year and always. The Head Start budget is $12.1 million. It serves 728 students. 480 of those are 3-year-olds, 248 are early Head Start, 6 weeks to 36 months. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I'll open the floor to questions. I'll start over here with Mr. Garrett.
I just said, you said the number of students, I was just,
Sure, 728 total. 480 are Head Start 3-year-olds and 248 are early Head Start 6 weeks to 36.
and how many facilities, I'm just curious,
We're at 12. We're at 12 facilities.
and the upswing of salaries is to keep competitive hiring.
It's really just, we're trying to stay on the CCSD pay schedule.
Okay. Above what, like the federal,
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
one of the higher paid in the state
okay.
for Head Start grants,
Does anyone, Ms. Stamp, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Question around your fringe benefits. I noticed that fringe benefits is at 77%.
Sure.
Why is it so much higher than?
What page are you looking at?
I'm looking
Avis,
at
can you
page-
address the
Page
fringe
3.
benefits, please?
Page 3. I'm sorry, Ms. Foxworth.
Oh, sorry.
What-
I was going to have Avis address the fringe benefits.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Yes, ma'am. The fringe benefits include, of course, the 25.91% for retirement, or is it 24.91% for retirement, and also the health and dental benefits for all staff in the program. So therefore, it's actually exceeds normal CAP agency and other agencies as far as the benefit package, which is now a mandate being held out from the Office of Head Start.
So you saying that the fringe benefit rates for this program is different than the rest of the county?
No,
No.
No, ma'am, it's in alignment, with CCSD. It's just that it exceeds, I mean, I
It-
guess it's a little inflated because of the amount that we pay for all employees on behalf of the program.
Princess, gonna.
it's
Mr.
approximately 35% of the base salary. Where are you seeing 77%?
Or is there and you have subtotal fringe benefits of 2,436,680, and you have total salary personnel of 3,125,026. If you calculate the percent of fringe benefit to personnel, it calculates at 77%. So that's telling me for every dollar in salary, you're spending 77 cents in fringe benefits, which is much higher than what the county is running. You're running around 44-45%. So I'm just
And
wondering.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure, Ms. Staff, is your
Yes.
name? Yes, ma'am. 2 separate budgets per program. There's an early Head Start budget and then there's a Head Start budget. So you should see a spreadsheet to incorporate close to $6 billion in salaries
Mhm.
for the total of salaries and then the benefits as well.
I think that's I think the personnel is subtotaled within the Head Start and early Head Start separately, and then the benefits are subtotaled all as one.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am. Yes, sir.
But
Right.
the health, dental, and vision is approximately 8,000 on average per employee, because that's based on their election through PIBA, the South Carolina healthcare system that we administer by law. We look at an average based on, sometimes you have an individual And that number is closer to $5,000 that we contribute. And sometimes with a family, it's greater than $10,000 that we contribute. And then for retirement, that's the PEBA mandated match on salaries. So the employee contributes approximately 9%, and then the employer contributes the amount that's stated there. And then the FICA unemployment and workers' comp is right at 9%. So our all-in percentage of the total salaries amount is right around 35%. And that's consistent with the rest of the district. So they're paid the same benefits on the same salary schedule that all CCSD employees are.
Yeah.
So what are we missing on the schedule? What's missing? If you look at the schedule, early head start, year 5 continuation budget, subtotal personnel, 3.125 million. Early head start training and technical assistance, 0, non-federal share, 1.529 million. So if you're saying we're missing some personnel, where's that additional personnel? Where's that number?
So we
The
budget.
staff on- I'm sorry. Go
Avis,
ahead.
I can take it, or I was just going to say that we budget the corresponding offset in the general operating fund. So there's a percentage of the total FTE that's covered by the Head Start grant for certain positions, and then the rest of it is covered in the general operating fund. So the Head Start grant is capped. It's $12,052,000 a year over the number of years that the grant's administered. And this FY26 is the last year, and we'll have to reapply. And so we offset the total program cost with the general operating fund. And what we did in the case of this budget was looked at the average salaries based on our projected FY26 with the amounts that we've shared with the board, which includes the base teacher for certifieds and our 100% of market maintenance for classifieds, and budgeted based on those and the positions that are currently in place without adding any additional positions.
All that sounds good, but basic calculation, this calculates to 77%. I'm still missing either something's missing, or you're saying that this Head Start program's fringe benefits is running at 77%. So, and I don't see where
And I
that
just
I
wanted to-
don't understand why this program is running at 77%. If you say it's in line, when you do the basic calculation, I would expect to see the fringe benefits in line with.
So I think you also have,
Even the shared, even if you're sharing salary.
we can share the report out of our financial system offline, but I think what Ms. Rock might agree with is that if you look at page 6 with the early Head Start program, there's an amount for additional personnel and benefits there. You have to add all of that together.
Yes, sir.
Add the amount on page 6 and
And
the
page
amount
4.
on page 3,
Yes.
fringe and benefits all together, and total that all up, it shakes out. And it's just because of the breakdown between the types of positions. I think on the early Head Start side, let me go back and look at this here. There's a lot less in terms of benefit positions that get health insurance. So
Correct.
that number is less on that side than it is on the Head Start side, because a lot of those positions receive full health insurance because they're full-time allocations versus temporary part-time allocations.
But you have
And
on that page, you have associated fringe benefit on page 6, you have. So I'm totally missing.
excuse me, do you mind if I clarify? The salary and benefits are split between programs. We have one CAN number for the Head Start grant, but the Head Start grant consists of early Head Start and Head Start. We get a fixed dollar amount based on the award letter that should be attached to your packet for Head Start, and then there's a fixed amount for early Head Start. So what you basically see is the majority of the benefits are coming out of the Head Start budget because there's not enough funding in the early Head Start to support all of the employees. So I split them accordingly based on the percentage of Head Start versus early Head Start, number of children in the program when it comes to shared positions. Those will be our centralized location positions, and also to accommodate all the health and benefits being funded fully by both programs. There's only one grant, one CAN number. So you should see two salary amounts and you should see two benefit amounts between the two programs.
And I think this is the federal government template that we have to set up for the submission for the budget. And that's why I was offering to share the report from our financial system, just so that you could see it as a composite where all the salaries are, all rolled up together, all the benefits are all rolled up together, and you would see that number total around 35%. But again, it depends on actual elections when it comes to health insurance as kind of the final determining factor.
And
And
that,
then if-
and that is correct. We wish we could do one report, but they have required us to separate it, which causes some of this. But we can definitely continue to take a look at the benefits between now and the board meeting.
I think that all of this is probably clarifying some of the questions that I had about looked like there were some discrepancies and inconsistencies.
The biggest thing is, maybe what we can do by the board meetings, have one whole one, and so you can see it all together, because we do have to split. We have more kids obviously in Head Start than we do in early Head Start. And so we have to split as what Ms. Rock was saying, we have to split the budget according to who's paid and what. And so if we can maybe provide for the board meeting a full one on top of this, maybe that would be, so you can see the full picture, not just divided.
I think that's probably a good idea. Thank you, Ms. Foxworth.
We can do that.
Mr. Bobrowski, did you have anything?
So right now, we're looking at an average cost per student at about $16,000. Am I right?
Plus CCSD is like 20,000.
Yes.
So where did you get the 20?
Adding up the pink side is another 3 million.
The
Or
part
the
that
not,
CCSD
not
I thought
federal
to-
share match.
Right.
So the total funding that we're asking from the government is 12, and then plus the 3, right? So it's,
We only can ask, the only amount of money we ask for is the total amount, which we're allocated is a 12 point.
it's a 12, that's the
0.1.
federal, that's
That's
set by the guidelines. So the prior issues that we had this year with this program, those have all been addressed, and are they going to affect any of this funding as we move forward?
with this, especially with staffing.
So the process that was completed earlier in the year, I need corrective action plan and everything was taken care of with that. So there's no threat to this year's prospective allocation. The only critical contingency is that this ultimately has to be approved by the board by the end of February for us to be able to submit, because they require the submission to go in before the 1st of March in order to be able to fund the next year's grant. So if we didn't get board level approval of this by the end of this month, we wouldn't be able to get it funded for FY26. And then as I mentioned, this is the last year of this Head Start grant, so we'll have to reapply for FY27 through 5 more years.
The Head Start grant is unfortunately not in the same cycle as the district's budget, so we have to take into consideration all proposed. And obviously, if it goes through, then we can move on it, and if it doesn't, then we have to adjust. But because the federal government requires us to turn in by March 1st, we have to try to fold in as many proposed that we know about.
And again, this is the same program that's currently being administered, no cuts, no expansions, with the breakdown of what the Head Start grant can cover up to that total fixed amount of $12,052,000. And then the GOF picks up the other portions of the salaries for the existing positions. And that's already budgeted as well. So it'll just be carryover or, continuation funding next year.
The main, what they carry is, one of our improvement efforts to raise student achievement was to have certified teachers. And so we are supporting the transition of certified teachers in our Head Start grant. And those are funded 50% by GOF.
All right, any more questions from?
Right. So you didn't answer the question. I mean, the question is we're going for the maximum that the federal government can allow. Yet the federal government came back last year and restricted us, right?
Not from a
No.
funding standpoint. No.
We were on an action plan for enrollment, but we are working through that. They have not limited our funding yet. We did get a corrected. They
Yeah.
did get a corrective action for an incident, but we have not, all of our corrective actions have been resolved. None of them have resulted in us losing funding.
Right. The reason I bring this up, because if this goes up and suddenly it's restricted and we've gone out to the public saying this is what the program's going to be, then we are going to have to stick into the GOF to fund the difference to make this happen.
Well, that not for FY26. So if, as long as this is approved by the 1st of March, then we'll have this funding for FY26. There's a chance that we might not get the award for FY27 and would have to make adjustments in the FY27 budget if we didn't get a new cycle.
So the next school year, starting in pretty much as soon as we get this one submitted, we are going to start an intensive strategic planning cycle to determine what really we need to do differently. It is an opportunity for us to rewrite our strategic goals, really look at our internal staffing, look at our trajectory, look at our student outcomes. So like everyone is saying, this is the last year for this budget cycle. And so next year when I come to you, you're going to see a new grant. Now, I don't know if the federal government will allow us to apply for any more. It may still be 12.1, but just know we look at our data all the time. We are trying to make some significant changes around staffing and support of students so we can minimize the incidents, so we can improve teacher morale and keep our teachers, because one of our biggest issues is we have a significant amount of teacher vacancies. So we've got to work on keeping our staff. And so we are taking all these things into consideration as we rewrite our grant. It will not look, the funding may be the same, but it will not look the same.
And right now, all of the auditing that's being done as to the program management is being done internally. We haven't put this out to an external audit.
So the audit that she's talking about that resulted in corrective action was the audit from the federal government.
That was by the federal, right?
Yeah. In terms of internal audit, I'm trying to think.
Avis,
which-
aren't we required our internal auditing? What is the requirement?
We're required to do an A133 audit,
Yeah.
along with the district's external audit. And
And
I
I'll-
think we've been in compliance with that.
I'll have to look and see when they're coming up on our internal audit plan. I'm not sure if it's this year or down the road.
Yeah, because that obviously that's going to be something that we're going to have to consider when we start setting our reserves with the budget, when we go into the
Mhm.
budget. And I guess this goes to it obviously goes to the superintendent, but as to the existing facilities, the capacity to support the program, when I look at this, budget, there's really nothing in there. And are we okay with that? Or is that going to be, once again, something we're going to be looking in for the district to be picking up on? Because so it looks to me like most of the federal money
Sure.
is going to be used for staffing and supplies, but I'm just looking for assurances that, we're not looking for any capital improvements that
Sure.
we haven't addressed.
I'll start and
for
then Mr.
future
Broy will
consideration.
finish. All of our sites, with the exception of one, are all in elementary schools. And so they're already in Mary Ford, Midland Park, and so they're already embedded. There's only one standalone site, and that's West Ashley Head Start on 61. That's the only one that is owned by the grant. So if we ever lost a grant, that building would also go. That's the only one that's a little bit older, that we're always looking to make sure we're providing the best environment for those children. But the district does an excellent job of keeping up that building. We do have a principal there who is really making sure that the building is maintained, and we're really seeing some gains there. So that's the only one long-term that we may be looking at. And there are, in the past, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, there have been opportunities for us to apply for capital if we felt like that is needed. We haven't got to that point yet, but that's where we are. Mr. Broy?
Thank you. And to Ms. Foxworth's point, the West Ashley Head Start facility is unfunded on the Phase 5 referendum. So there was a specific line item to replace that facility. It is unfunded right now. It's among $470 million worth of projects that we've not allocated funding to yet. We continue to evaluate potential swing space within the district to see if we can put them in a better complex. But as Ms. Foxworth mentioned, the principal does a phenomenal job out there. The facilities management team puts a lot of time and effort out there to keep the facility at a condition where we are comfortable with children being there. But that is, again, one facility we want to replace ultimately.
Thank you.
While we're on that, I know I've spoken multiple times from the dais about West Ashley and the need for early childhood development. I don't know that I've specifically asked about that, but partnering with MUSC that's there in Citadel Mall, would that be a viable option? Did anybody approach MUSC about that conversation?
I have not. I'm very concerned with the requirements of Head Start. They are very, I don't want to say they're very onerous, but there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get a space qualified. And we have a hard enough time within our own complex to have a space that is acceptable within the standards of Head Start. So no, we haven't looked at any of the outside agencies. We just know how hard it is to look at any other place because of the complex requirements of
But
that
if-
program.
But if we lose federal funding, those restrictions would kind of change a little bit, right? Especially, which leads into my next question. Have we started exploring other funding options through philanthropy and other things like that, where we could have a little less regulation, a little bit more freedom in terms of partnering with MUSC for an early childhood development and Head Start program there? But I think that facility would be pretty ideal.
I'll just point out that philanthropy, I've been here 11 years. And we had philanthropy that was going to build the barn at Beckham. We had philanthropy that was going to sponsor skyboxes at the District 4 Stadium. We had, Frierson multipurpose room. We've yet to come up with philanthropy that's generated enough for an entire facility. There is one charter school that's been successful with that. And they do have a new facility, but it is a long road to haul to get enough money to create a complex of this nature. So I'm not beyond looking at it. I just know that we haven't been successful in the past to come up with a dollar amount that can
Well,
meet our needs.
and since charter, I'm just brainstorming with you. That's what committee's for. Since you bring up charter school, there's Voyager that has that brand new facility on Beesphere.
That's the one example that I'm referring to, in which
Okay.
they received a philanthropist donation to give them the foundation to finance that facility. And they still have loans. They didn't pay for it outright.
Mhm.
Even with that philanthropist, they still have that loan on the balance sheet.
Mhm. But the point of my bringing them up was, should something happen with with our facility for Head Start, would they be willing to merge that and work together?
So Mrs. Watley, it would be something, I'm sorry, we'd have to pursue. We don't have fundraisers or people currently hired to sort of pursue those opportunities, but we could certainly look into it, as a viable option moving forward. Right now, we're hopeful not to lose federal funding in support of the work.
Right, right. And my whole reason is not to put all your eggs in one basket. So we know this is coming, could potentially impact us. Let's get ahead of it and start looking. That's just kind of how I am. I
Sure.
look down the road
Sure.
rather than waiting for something to happen and then I'm reacting to it.
Sure. We certainly understand, as Mr. Burley noted, though, restrictions on early childhood, whether it's DSS, local regulations and other things are incredibly prohibitive. So we appreciate your forward thinking and we'll take note of it. And Ms. Foxworth, we can follow up in conversation.
All right. Does anybody else have anything?
Calculation.
Can you
Please say it again.
Oh, sorry about that.
FTEs was also something I was looking at.
How do you calculate, like, you have different days, you're saying FTEs, but then you have like maybe 190 days to 40 days to 80?
I can explain that.
Yeah.
So for Early Head Start, we're in the process of transitioning. The Office of Head Start wants us to have a certain percentage of our classroom, Early Head Start, which is a 6 weeks to 36 months, to be year round. And so right now we have a percentage are 240 and a percentage are 190. And that's why it looks like this. Right now we have 3 full sites that are 240 and the rest of them remain 190. It's very expensive to go year round. And so that's why you see 2 different sites, 2 different FTE categories.
Okay. So we will, the motion is to, well, can I get a motion from the floor?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that will move to the regular board meeting. on February. It's not actually listed on here. Hmm. Okay. Moving on to item 2B. Fixed cost of ownership, FY25. Daniel Prentice, Mr. Prentice, do you want to go ahead with that, or Mr. Baroi?
There's a little bit of both in this one. This is for an FCO reallocation for nursing services, facility services, and IT. I'll let Mr. Baroi touch on facility services and nursing services, and I can touch on IT.
Program contingency.
Sure. So we have funds that are available in the FCO program through a combination of a budgeted contingency as well as interest earnings throughout the year. And so those amounts are appropriated into a contingency, and then occasionally we'll come to the board to transfer those contingency funds to cover other needs.
So is that what these are to cover? These
Yes.
needs? Okay.
Right, and so the facility services and nursing services are for replacing signage at Bridgeview and Calhoun Street, and the nursing services to provide AEDs and medical kits for this facility as well.
And then for IT, this is for some funding for Kronos. We're currently going through a transition from Kronos to our Munis Tyler Technologies platform for timekeeping. So there's some overlap this year with those services before we cut over to the new solution, which will ultimately save us about $500,000 a year, as well as some equipment that we purchased over the summer when we had our network outage. So that'll cover those items as well as some additional Microsoft licenses based on our staffing for the year.
I'll open the floor up for questions. Mr. Garrett,
None.
Mr. Duke,
None.
Ms. Stamp, Mr. Grabowski.
Whenever I look at these software increases, these obviously aren't one-time expenses. We're paying all these on an annual basis.
So in the case of Kronos, for example, we currently pay about $600,000 a year for the time and attendance component, whereas this is where hourly employees clock in using a badge swipe at the time clock. Those badge swipe time clocks from Kronos are going to go away, and there'll be a new clock installed from Munis Tyler Technologies. We're consolidating with our current ERP system, and that solution will cost less than $100,000 a year. So we'll see about $500,000 in savings once that's implemented, but we're currently running some parallels to get everything crossed over by the end of the fiscal year.
And on the Microsoft licenses, the land school device management, the SolarWinds network monitoring, we're locked into these platforms.
We pay kind of based essentially on an average of our user base that we have in existence. So sometimes those costs just fluctuate based on the number of active users we have tied to full-time employees that we have within the system. And so this is just a true up of that amount for the year. But when you see the FCO budget come before Audit and Finance in March for a recommendation, it'll include all of these software amounts with the full amount for the year detailed and the breakdown for each of them.
So when we look at the budgeting for projecting onto the 26th school year, we're obviously taking into account that these software expenses are going to be.
I think our software for CCSD as a whole is around $13 million out of FCO that we spend a year, and we break it down by department and what they consume so the board can see it that way.
So the program contingency, explain to me on the balance and what we're looking for to close out this year. What projections are we looking that may have any effect on that?
So with the FCO, we don't run a fund balance there. It's just the annual budget. And so as those interest earnings post, we just appropriate it until it's spent down to zero. I think we've currently got about $24 million left over. And that'll be in the capital projects report that's presented later in the meeting in the FY25 FCO. So our goal, of course, is to appropriate what we can expend in that 12-month period. And then we issue that bond anticipation note to fund the program and then pay that off as property tax receipts come in the spring.
because I'm trying to understand, we've got a mid-year adjustment basically, which is what's happening right now. So I'm trying to understand why these variances, even though we're really only, what we're talking,
So-
$400,000.
I was just gonna add, one
Nothing
of the-
much out of a $30
Right.
million, budget line item. It's
I
not
mean,
much.
as Mr. Prentice mentioned, we maintain a contingency
Right.
at the start of the year for unexpected expenses, and then you've got the interest earning.
Yeah.
So, these are expenses that have come up since the budget was.
We issued $64 million in a bond anticipation note May 18th. And so each month the interest earnings on that post and it just accumulates. And then we just add those into the contingency every month and then they're available to transfer. So I'm sure there'll be a couple more contingency transfers as we get throughout the year
Down to zero.
to get it
bring-
down to zero. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask about the variance myself, so. Any more questions for this item? All right, with that, do I have a motion from the floor?
Move to approve.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, with that, the item 2B will move to the regular scheduled board meeting. And then we'll move on to item 2C. Mr. Prentice?
Sure. So this is a phase 4 sales tax reallocation. I'll let Mr. Broey touch on the North Charleston High School athletics piece of it. And then there's a small IT piece to this as well.
So the North Charleston athletics reallocation is a big deal. There's a lot of work behind developing the need for that funding. I've got Mr. Hamer behind me that can talk to the specifics of that project in greater detail as he's personally been managing it.
Good afternoon. This is just to give a little bit more details about the extent of the work that we have there. This is a very complex project, and we originally had a sales tax allocation for the project that was done in November of 23 by the board. To be fair, I think the scope and the intentions of the school for what needed to be done on site there, not only in the short term, but kind of the vision for the long-term needs for athletic programs there that evolved over the time of that first reallocation. And so once we got into design, working with an A&E firm, we realized that there had to be a significantly more extensive amount of renovations done at the site. So that's the purpose of this reallocation, to add more funds to our estimate of what needs to be done. The work will begin to the extent that we do get this approved in May of this year. It will be in place so that they have these facilities for practice for their field to field their teams by the football season of 26. But again, this reallocation is to increase the budget from the original allocation we had in fall of 23.
I'll open the floor up for questions. Ms. Stamp, do you have something?
This is just a general question. Are the Charleston County facilities open to the public, the communities around it for use?
So the short answer is yes. So we have two really things in place. One is we have memorandums of agreement with our local municipalities. So the city of North Charleston, Charleston, Mount Pleasant, that there's a joint use agreement between our facilities and their facilities. So they set up a lot of their leagues and a lot of their functions at our schools, just like we use their fields where possible. Then we have the facility use program. Facility use program handles after hours use. Those that want to use the facility, let's say it is a stadium, they'll come to us. We'll find out what exactly they need. Do they need the audio? Do they need lighting? How long do they use it for? What kind of custodial do we need to have? Security? And we have a very reasonable pay structure for that. It's cheaper than where they can get things elsewhere in general for our facilities. And that facility use program is approved by the Board of Trustees. That funding strategy is approved by the board.
Do they rent it from us or is it
Right.
free?
They rent it from us. And it's a staggered pay structure like nonprofits. It's a lot less than a for-profit company as an example. So we base it on who's actually, the capabilities of them being able to use the facility on their funding background.
Were there any more questions?
Oh, yeah. I am struggling with this big time. You know, an athletic upgrade, and I've got so many other infrastructure items on your list that you come forth, and we're going to put $10 million into an athletic upgrade.
So, sir,
Strike.
this is similar to our situation last month. The funds we're looking for is capital maintenance. So this is a capital maintenance fund. It's a renovation and upgrade of an existing facility. Last month, we brought forward Pleasant Academy air conditioning, military magnet air conditioning. Those projects were capital maintenance projects that surfaced since the program was funded. This is the similar situation. Outside of this project, there is no unfunded capital maintenance sitting on the sideline waiting to compete against this money at this point. So there is no other capital maintenance project that we're pulling this ahead of that the funding is eligible for.
So this is following under the restricted theory, restricted funded theory. These funds are restricted specifically for this capital maintenance. So when somebody brings up the argument, why aren't we building another, addition to a school? We're
So it's, yes, sir.
falling within the guidelines of a restricted fund.
Phase 4 is limited to specific line items on the referendum by name and capital maintenance and capital information technology. There are no, in the phase 5 program, we have a building improvements line
Right.
where a lot of these projects that are in the backlog could be eligible.
Was,
So as I see it, then we will be left still with about $26 million in this fund for future maintenance issues that are coming up.
So it ends up being, if you go to the note at the bottom, because the board approved the 14.6 million on January 27th, which was before this was drafted. We noted down there that that's now been approved. So you have to take that 14.6 million out. So if this is approved, there'll be about $12 million left over in unallocated program contingency in phase 4, which this is all interest earnings. And right now that's bringing in about $280,000 a month in interest based on the balance that's sitting in that account. So that'll continue to grow a little bit as some of these expenditures start to draw that down.
And we're not looking at any risk of any clawbacks or anything. This isn't an unlimited. So once these taxes were received, collected, this contingency fund, the balance stays. And then the only thing we
Collections
can
have
do
ended. There's
is-
no more sales tax revenue coming in from this particular program. So our approach has been, if there's an eligible expenditure that fits that capital maintenance umbrella, let's use these funds first since they're the oldest, and then start to get through those before we start to tap another source.
And we are 93% expended.
Yep.
Right.
The money's received, which is over 700 million.
I mean, I understand the marquees.
Yep.
Fully support
We got
that,
six-
man.
six
I
of
can't-
them
I
that
can't imagine that we only have 6.
Don't work.
I'm shocked. I mean,
They're on a replacement plan. There's a multitude of them throughout the system, but there's 6 of them that are the old Tektronix model that they don't support for maintenance anymore. 2 of which are completely non-functioning, and 4 are on their last leg. So this will get the one at West Ashley High School and St. John's online, and then replace 4 other ones, and we'll get them on our regular refresh cycle with more supported equipment so we can maintain them over time.
How long has North Charleston been on the list? I know you said they
So-
were part of the list. How long have they been waiting?
So back in 2023, we put together a facility condition needs assessment for several schools that we had not done that for. Baptist Hill, Military Magnet, Academic Magnet, Stall High School, and North Charleston High were the schools that we're focused on. The board reallocated more than $40 million to this effort back in 2023, as Mr. Hamer mentioned, as we laid out the scope of this work and realized a lot of things were going to have to be relocated, upgraded, and moved. We came up with this additional dollar figure. So we are very pleased with the prior boards and the current board support for athletics. I think athletics, outside of all of the multi-purpose rooms for the elementary schools, is something that we really needed to step up on to create an atmosphere where we're competitive with the rest of the state. If you look at facilities in the rest of the state, We're still a few steps behind. The money that has been allocated by the board will get us back up to that, and certainly this reallocation.
So that is exactly what I was gonna go into, because I remember this from the board. I was gonna actually go right in. When was this, facility built, and was it built under phase 4?
So this was a practice facility when when Attaway Heinzen Stadium still existed. This was a practice field. When we demolished Attaway Heinzen to create the Center for Advanced Studies on that footprint, that practice field became essentially a game field for several of the sports, like soccer is number one, began to use that as a gameplay field. So it was farther behind than most complexes, because at the time when Attaway Heinzen existed, it was only a practice field. So we had a lot of work to bring that one up to par.
And having been out at North Charleston recently and seeing the growth and the wonderful things that Principal Darby's doing, I mean, I can see the value of upgrading this, stadium. Don't get me wrong. It's really just such a large amount coming out with the understanding, of the potential of future HVAC problems and things. But I feel very sure that you've got your strategic plan laid out.
So North Charleston, when you look at what's been done over the last several years, complete front office refurbishment, along with the weight room, cafeteria expansion, that was I call it phase 1, a big step. We had a huge CTE project for culinary arts. We have the athletics work that's going on under Mr. Hamer right now. And then we'll see what happens in phase 6. Phase 6, I hope that we get to a point where we can look at an auxiliary gym. Most schools of this size have 2 gyms. They only have 1. So there's a lot of competition between their own internal teams to get playing time. And we do need to upgrade the auditorium as well. That's another one that will be coming up. So we do have a good phase plan. We're not as far along as we'd like to be with execution, but there's been a lot of work that's been done over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I was just happy to see that it didn't include artificial grass. So
This one will, sir, to be open and honest.
Thanks for opening that can of worms.
Yes, sir.
This isn't the stadium, though, that's been the hot button.
So at the fields, this is a nuance of terms. At the high schools that have access to a regional stadium, that is the stadium, a regional stadium. This is a field, but it's a field that allows for competitive of events where they'll have the lighting, they'll have the scoreboard, they'll have a field house, they'll have a concession stand, restrooms. We want them to be able to play on their campus. We will make sure that the regional stadium is used throughout the year. So we're making the maximum use of that field. But what we have realized in this regional stadium concept is that putting 4 schools in one stadium has been very challenging, especially with time and distance as well to get to that stadium. So having all of those fields at those 4 schools that share that stadium to a point where they can compete on their campus, I think it adds to school community. It adds to pride in that location, but they still have, again, a larger venue at the regional stadium.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Superintendent, I mean, we are seeing an increase in North Charleston's attendance.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So finally, all these wonderful people that are moving into it, hopefully we'll start seeing the wonderful things at this facility. I mean, I'm all in favor, even with the artificial grass.
Absolutely.
So
And-
would that increase is the demographics changing? for
Not-
North Charleston
good question,
of
Ms.
who's
Stamp.
Coming in?
Not so much. Not yet. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. But we are, not with the current numbers, but we are pleased that North Charleston High School was recently removed. You'll be pleased too, Mr. Garrett, from the state's designation list. So we're proud of the improvements that the academic team is making there at North Charleston High and the leadership of Mr. Darby. It was just, we just got notification last week.
I will have to say that, because I was there for that. But when I look at the student population at North Charleston, it is a radical change from what it was 10 years ago. So, you know, I do hope, especially like with North Charleston Elementary, that, you know, more of the people that are moving into the area start using this good school and the staff that he's got, because it's incredible.
Well, our goal is to make neighborhood schools places where all
Yes.
people want to send their
It's a good
children, right?
investment.
So that's what we're working on. And we're seeing that, Ms. Stamp, change at the elementary school. North Charleston Elementary is rated good. Hunley Park is now rated good. We're very close to good at Shakora. So we're changing the tide, in academics in North Charleston. So we're pleased with that.
Not just changing it because of.
Absolutely.
Moving into the
Cor-
area.
There you
You
go.
don't have to think about it in there.
That's exactly right.
That's what we change.
Equitable opportunity for all students. That's right, Ms. Stamp. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Do I have a motion on the floor?
Move to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the item moves to the regular scheduled board meeting. And then we'll move on to item 2D. With that, we'll go Ms. Shaw.
She's on the way.
Yes, good afternoon, Board Chair and members. This here is a very special reallocation for our Phase 3 sales tax program. It represents the very last project that we have within our Phase 3 program that will be executed. This project, again, is at its final stages, or excuse me, the final part of the program. Without this particular reallocation, which will be to construct the bus project for D3, if we do not have the funding in order to do so, of course, the project will not be able to happen. We plan on starting the project in March of this year and completing the project in June of next year. The project amount is $2,187,921 that will fully fund this project. We currently, at the moment, have an RFQ out for advertisement, and that is due back on February 13th. That completes my reporting.
Okay. Any questions from the floor?
So with the bus lot, what basically, do you build a structure? Is it just?
So it's primarily pavement for bus parking and the driver's personal vehicles. And then we have a small facility for the dispatcher and for the drivers to go to the restroom and prepare for work.
That's a stupid question, but where's D3 again?
This bus lot is actually going to
James
be,
Island? That,
yeah.
That's
James
correct.
Island is District
okay.
3.
And there's no controversy surrounding wherever it's gonna be?
Oh,
Okay.
But it has been for years.
sir, as you recall from our time together years ago, this was my first public meeting, this bus lot, and that was
Yes.
11 years ago.
7 or 8 years. in the-
Yes.
That's why it's so special.
Right, okay.
I've told them they can't name it after me.
If you say so.
Does anybody else have anything?
Yeah, the only question, when I looked at project, you know, we're using a portion of this, well, I guess the remaining funds, because
Yes.
after this,
We've been
this will
everywhere.
never come up in front of us ever again. But we're using a portion of this for project management with Cummings, a good chunk, but is that to oversee the management of everything on this list, or is this additional?
That was the original project code that was set up for all the project management. I guess Cumming was the program manager for phase 3. So you're seeing some literally the $2 that were left in that line being scraped out and moved
So
over to
their
cover
final
this.
payment.
We're sweeping
pretty much,
everything up.
Yeah, so there's no additional funding going to
Right.
them through this program, you know, associated with that line item, but there was a balance.
Right, because the reason is obviously the District 3 bus lot was that's part of the phase 3. So this is
That
the
was
only
the specific
money
line
they
item
ever
on
got.
phase 3. It was a specific line item. Bus lot for D3.
Goodbye.
All right, if there's nothing else, we will take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That it moves to the regular board meeting. And then we'll move on to item 3A, our information items. FY 2025 SWIMBY mid-year utilization report. Mr. Prentice, would you like to take that?
Yes. So this is our 6-month update, the mid-year report for our small women minority business enterprise program per the policy that we have in place, which is in alignment with the procurement code. I will note for some historical context that this was a prior audit finding. And when I arrived at CCSD, realized that there was not a recurring reporting as required by the policy of our SWIMBY procurements over the year. The policy says that we'll report to the board twice a year, once at the midpoint and once at the end of the fiscal year for the full fiscal year. And then we also have to bring the policy forward on an annual basis for the board to review with any recommended changes by staff. So we brought that policy forward for review. And we have assigned this as a task to our procurement office on a 6-month basis to provide the mid-year report and the year-end report, which we are now doing regularly. So this is the FY25 mid-year report. You previously saw the FY24 year-end report. Happy to report here that our SWIMBY spend, if you will, for the first 6 months of FY25 is 22% of total expenditure. Our policy, which is in alignment with state law, says that we have to maintain a minimum of 10%. Last time you saw this, it was floating in the 13 to 14% range. What's changed during that time? We've had a good volume of procurement the first 6 months of the year. We've fully staffed our procurement office for the first time in a number of years. We have no vacancies in that office. We've also implemented our new online procurement portal, so nothing is done on paper. All of our bids are done electronically now, and we're able to track the vendors that are interested, respond, reject, or otherwise inquire about a procurement and track all of those metrics. So that was implemented during this period. One thing that I'll note is that while 22% is our reported total for those that are compliant in reporting as a SWIMBY eligible vendor, if you include all of those that are even not certified but are technically falling into that category, the amount actually goes up to about 29%. So we are in compliance with state law and our policy, and we'll report this out to the board and then do it again at the end of the fiscal year.
Very good. I'll go ahead and open the floor up for questions. Ms. Stamp, you want to go first?
So the SWIMBY capital items, what are those actual projects?
So that we have in our master contracts with general contractors, we require that they report to us their subcontractor utilization with small women minority business enterprise, and then they report that back to us. So even though our contract with the general contractor is not to SWIMBY necessarily, their subcontractor that they hire to provide electrical services in a new school construction may be a minority business enterprise. And so they report their dollar spend back to us. And then we include that in our reporting, as well as P cards and then all of our direct procurements through purchase orders.
Okay, so the amount that is spent through regular POs that you have more control over, what are you doing to increase the minority spend in that area? Because the 22% looks good, but when you start talking about your day-to-day PO spend, you're around 4% to minority.
So
is there anything that you're trying to do to increase?
So as I mentioned, we've got the new procurement portal. It's solicited through OpenGov, but it's a customized portal that we network with other public entities on. So what we're seeing now, and this just launched on December 2nd, so we've only got really maybe a month of data in here with the new portal live. I would expect that we'll see some increased volume over the next 6 months as a result. But if a vendor enrolls in that portal in Texas, and they're a contractor that provides services throughout the country that's a minority business enterprise, and they say, I'd like to receive solicitations for IT services. and we put out a solicitation for IT services and they've enrolled in a certain region or area, they're going to get our solicitation through their portal and see that that's available. Whereas previously, we were literally just posting the PDF document on our website and hoping that people would go check to see if there was, potential interest for doing business with CCSD. So just in the first few solicitations that we put out on that portal, we saw a significant increase in volume of interested vendors. The first one that we did was for some technology software for our applicant tracking system. And the thing that we can do with that now too is see with that particular solicitation, when a business opens it, if they're a minority business enterprise, we can see that, 17 women-owned businesses and 12 African-American-owned businesses looked at it. Whether or not they actually decided to respond, they can add comments if they want to. And then of those that responded, who was ultimately selected. So we get a lot more data now and a lot more spread and coverage. We're also doing, local vendor fairs, particularly with construction and then general goods and services to try and, encourage folks to come to the table. And as I mentioned previously, I think what's important too is that these vendors go through the certification process so that they get that full consideration. Because if they're not actually certified, they may be women owned, but they don't actually get to check that box. But I think that portal in particular is going to go a long way. This is the first organization that I've worked in that didn't have a procurement portal in place that kind of spread across a larger region. And so OpenGov has a very nice platform, and we'll get a lot more distribution and marketing of our solicitations as a result.
I would like, Ms. Stamp, before you go on to that, I just want to, we've got new board members that are here. I would encourage the new board members to read that audit 5230. Mr. Prentice, would you mind sending that to the new board members so that they can go over that audit of the swim?
It's on the website. That doesn't have anything to do with this per se. That's specific to how we were administering SWIMBY in the past. And so that there's a long history on that.
Right, but you were talking about changes that have been made just to kind of catch them up to speed.
So the SWIMBY policy is more so in terms of our compliance and reporting. It's not pertaining to 5230 at all. So 5230 is in the procurement code, and the SWIMBY policy is an ad hoc document that's approved by the board, which is required by the different section of the procurement code.
I guess the reason why I was bringing it up is because you mentioned the portal, because as I recall in that audit, there were issues with the way applications were being handled.
So there was a recommendation for providing more technology support in terms of bidding the e-procurement. So that's what that was related to, but it wasn't related to SWIMBY or 5230. There was just a recommendation that we adopt modern software to do e-bidding because everything was just a PDF on the website. But that was, I think you're talking about the disparity study from 2022. So that was part of the disparity study. The SWIMBY issue, with 5230 was somewhat separate there. And then this in particular is related to that AUP finding with, just actual reporting of SWIMBY.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Stamp.
No, my question was just if you had a breakdown of SWIMBY capital in the same categories like you do for the EO spend and the e-card spend.
That might be a question Mr. Burrow can assist. Would we get that from the construction management firm?
So they maintain a breakdown by project. So if we look at each project, they should have a breakdown of how each vendor is doing with their SWMBE. Yeah, by project.
We only have it at the level that it's shown in the report for everything else because our system actually has an enrollment tracking capacity. My microphone went off. Which category they fall within, and so we just matrix it out that way so that we can show it. But the information on the subcontractors is just something that we require of our construction management firm in compliance with their contract.
Was that it? Anybody else? Mr. Grabowski.
So as I looked at this, the professional technical services was 900,000. The rental was 900,000. Technology and supplies was 140. Yet construction services was only 64,000 to date. is that
Which one are you looking
I'm
under?
just looking at the overall report. I broke it down into those 4 categories. And the reason that when I look at that and I look at what you're saying, it just seems that, we're spending over 900,000. That's 25% of the total SWIMBY, allocation. So 25% of that is going towards professional and technical services. And the reason I bring that up is that I think that's the room for trying to, are we paying a premium price for services? And that's an area that would concern me that, how are we auditing? When I look at what I could be getting out on the open market, are we paying a premium to get that number up to the 22% or up over the 10%? Or is this just, a straight bid and this is how the bid fell and you are now looking at who the actual vendor is that got the award?
This is
that
looking
make sense?
at who it is that got the award, and
Right.
so this could be a combination of competitive procurement, exempt, all the different categories that of potential procurement methods that we would employ.
And that's the word that scared me, the
And-
exemption.
And
And because that had been in the past, had been with ESSER was a nightmare, was, the exemption. I forget the wonderful little number that we had, that everybody was falling under the educational exemption.
and on those
That's
academic,
why when you went back to the professional services, technical services being such a large one, I'm hoping with this new software that you've got, that there's some way that we can start tracking, I hate looking at numbers this way.
So-
I like competitive bids, and then I like holding somebody accountable for the competitive bid that they got it rather than looking at who they are.
So in the case of the academic services, you see a lot of exemptions for competition purely based on the code. And so with local funds, that's, there's no cap. And with federal funds, we're now consistently employing the process where we get a approval through the state for the, exemption over $10,000 for non-compete, which was the issue that we were talking about with ESSER. The other thing that we've started doing very consistently in the last month or so is that outcomes-based contracting. And I think that that's going to help, even if it's non-competitive, with tying expenditure of funds to ROI. I'll give you an example. We had a request for tutoring services come through a couple of weeks ago and said, looks like a good opportunity. I think it was about $100,000 for one school. They were looking to use some different funding sources to do that. Doesn't have to be competed because it is exempt under the code. But we said, if we want to engage with this vendor in a contract, the vendor should come and, consider maybe 80% of what they're asking for as a base fee. And if they actually meet an improvement in test scores with, the particular tracking mechanism that we used for that subject matter area, then we'll give them what they're asking for. And so there's a contract underway for that vendor now to give them less than the fee that they were asking for providing the availability of the service, and then an additional amount within the full amount requested for the actual performance. And so I think that that'll help on the academic side with a lot of these exemptions, and we will be able to track what was outcomes based, who got just the base, who exceeded the base, and what was the actual performance metric and true ROI on that area. And so we're just starting, whenever we see things come through, procurement starting to train their brain to say, how about you look at this as an outcomes-based contract? What metrics might you consider? So we'll still do the contracting, but we need the academic side of the house to come to us and say, well, this is a trackable metric that we could assign to this vendor so that, on a more granular scale, we can look at, tutoring services across several different schools provided by this vendor and see how they actually performed, and not just say, well, they provided tutoring for 2,400 hours. And so I think that'll help in the area where you have a lot of those, non-competitive type circumstances.
Because it really just comes down to, are we getting the best for the
Mhm.
money that we're spending? I mean, it's just that
Student
simple.
achievement is why we're here.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And
absolutely.
so, and this is where these exemptions, if I had it any way, I'd get rid of all of them and we wouldn't have any exemptions. It'd be purely on the merits of what the bid was put out. I mean, I'm all in favor of supporting it. I'm just shocked, and I get it. It's hard to compete, for capital projects because they're so large and they're so
Well, and some of it, when it comes to construction, that there's a lot of market drivers and trades that come into it. When you look at some of these professional services on the academic side, I use the tutoring example. We kind of know what a market rate is for a professional to come in and provide the service, and look at the availability of vendors and who has somebody that can come in and do that at this location. And then they cut them loose and they're in the school at that hourly rate. We are looking at a circumstance where we could potentially pay a stipend to our staff to provide the same services at a lesser amount than what we would pay a third party contractor, because it's a lot more invested in the kids within that school. And that's something that we're looking to do in terms of WSF, to give additional tools to the schools. Instead of using a contractor, let's use our own human capital to invest in our students outside of the core hours of the day. But yeah, there's a number of different things that we see that fit the exemption status, and we try to be thoughtful with them, especially now with some of these other opportunities, to make sure that we're actually getting the best bang for our buck.
All right, we'll move on to item 3B, purchases and contracts greater than 250. Mr. Prentice, I'll go ahead and open it up to you. And can we go ahead and address that line item number 1, which I reached out to you over the weekend about?
So
Go ahead.
this is which this is only showing the way it was procured, not necessarily the strategy behind how it was funded or timing or anything like that. But we had one new competitive procurement in the Phase 4 program, which was the Murray Lassane multi-purpose room. We advertised that for 45 days and got 4 bids. So we awarded a total amount of $3.38 million, and that's been reviewed by all the applicable parties. So good to go there. And then on the second page, for non-competitive or other procurement methods and existing contracts, we have 7 items. There's 3 of them are change orders to existing contracts. And then the others are existing contracts, the indefinite delivery contracts that we already have underway. And there is one exemption in here, which is to Charleston Dorchester Mental Health for school-based mental health services in the amount of $295,000.
I'll go ahead and open up the floor to questions.
I'll jump in. I hate sole source. And I really am questioning this, this Learning Education Inc. increase, it's $600,000 on a sole source.
So that was only sole sourced. And this is another item that, if you go back to that same audit that I mentioned from 2 years ago that had the finding pertaining to the SWIMBY report, there was a finding on their report related to the reporting of sole sources and emergency procurements. That wasn't being done routinely. That was noted. We provided the report. We have to provide that to the board annually. So we're now going to provide and already have provided a list of all the sole sources and emergency procurements throughout the system over a 12-month basis. But in this particular circumstance, this was a contract that was authorized under ESSER, and it was extended at some point prior to the sunset of ESSER through May 31st of 2025. And so we had a binding contract in place, and we had to essentially pick up the balance from July 1, 2024 through May 31st of 2025. It was funded through EIR, which is one of our federal grants, ESSER, and Title II. So there were 3 legs to that contract in terms of how it was funded. Let Ms. Huggins or others speak to the type of services provided there. But as of May 31st, that'll be over and there will be no further. But the only reason that had to be picked up this way this fiscal year is because the PO ended. There was a new contract that was executed, and it was tied to the prior ESSER funded initiative, and there was a tail on that ESSER funding, and so we picked that up through May 31st per the contract.
That makes no sense at all. A tail?
So
I mean, we have an ESSER funded program, right?
So
The contract ends, ESSER funds end, contract over, services over. End of story.
You're right. But in this particular case, the contract extended beyond the term of ESSER, which should not have happened, frankly. And so
How can that happen?
Because, well, in that case, the contract was executed And it was, a situation where ESSER sunset September 30th and the contract was executed for a term beyond that. So when I saw it, I said, you can't fund this with ESSER beyond September 30th. What would you like to do with it? And the decision, well, we had an obligation through the contract though, because the contract had already been executed. So we had a contractual obligation, and the contract that was put forth was the vendor's contract, not our standard term contract, which has non-appropriations and other language. Fix that issue. And so when we've terminated other contracts related to ESSER that were on our own template that had non-appropriations language to ensure that if there was a situation where somebody executed a contract and the funding ended, even though the contract extended beyond it, that we could claw it back. But in this particular case, the decision or the request of the folks that had executed the contract was that they would like to use EIR and Title II funding that they had available to fund the remaining balance of the contract until its conclusion, and then it would end for good from there.
So we're using federal funds to cover the tail. We're not using general operating.
Correct. There is no GOF in this whatsoever. It's all federal funds. It was ESSER, then EIR, then Title II, and then over. Yep, no GOF pickup on it. And again, there are others that were ESSER funded that extended beyond September 30th, and we exercised our right under the non-appropriations language in our standard contract template to terminate those contracts for that reason.
Thank you for the clarification.
There has been no, just to be clear, there has been no GOF liability in FY25 for anything pertaining to ESSER. All of that was dealt with in FY24. We're closed out. Yep.
Good job. Excellent.
But this is a situation where you really should be looking at what is behind the sole source. I mean, you're not going to be able to get, while you may not like it, you're not going to be able to get rid of sole source procurements. I mean, there are just some people that they're the only ones that do it. We need the service or we need the product. And so in reality, you're not going to get rid of sole source. But do we have it documented? And what, so that's where you read and maybe ask for, let me see your documentation for the sole source to make sure that it's justified.
You're right, Ms. Stamp. I mean, especially in IT, I mean, I get it. Once we're onto a certain platform, it's insane. You're locked into that platform, so you have to use sole source. And there's no question. Look, I'm involved in a sole source issue at my day job. Emergencies pop up and sole source comes in. But when I get into some of these ESSER funding, situations, but as long as we do have the federal funds to cover this, and it's not affecting our general operating, and it's ending in May, I can live with it.
I don't know if you should be concerned. I think the concern should be the concern and not regardless of the fund source. And I mean, that's what the federal government is going to look at. They're going to look at, am I being treated the same if it's your general funds and if you're using my funds? So you need to be concerned, especially if it's federal funds, you need to be concerned of how those funds are used.
And especially if the federal government pulls a clawback. I agree with you.
Yes.
Yep. So we, just for some clarity there, the way the code reads, we have to provide a report at the 6-month mark to the superintendent and at the 12-month mark in the fiscal year to the board. So our interim report, we had 38 sole sources and 1 emergency procurement throughout the entire system during the 6-month period. I would say, given prior experience and given the volume that we do here, that's reasonable. And typically it's tied. I mean, there's things on here, if you look at, MUSC Department of, or is it on here? There was an MUSC Department of Psychiatry on here, just the way that particular office is established. It wasn't compliant with one of the exemptions on the list, but given the services that they offer in the region in which we operate, it made sense that, that was classified that way. There's things on here like, McGraw-Hill, in terms of things that tie to instructional materials that are specific, can only be acquired from that particular vendor. But again, we report that out at the 6-month mark, the superintendent, and then we'll give the full report to the board again in July of 2025.
All right, we'll move on to item 3C. Mr. Prentice, the monthly financial report.
Yes, get back over there. So we have the monthly financial report for December. Our revenues are coming in as anticipated. We had posted about $86 million in local sources and 116 million in state sources through the end of the year. Saw that jump up tremendously in January as property tax receipts started to come in strong. So we're still anticipating a small positive variance in revenues at the end of the year that lines up with our prior forecasting. On the expenditure side, we're still anticipating to come in under budget on salaries and benefits. We just did some mid-year reconciliations over the last week that are showing what our lap salaries are going to look like through the end of the year. So when you start to see the January and February reports, you'll see some additional savings there. But as of now, we're looking at about a $1.8 million positive variance at the end of the year. Later on in the meeting, I'll share our updated long-range financial forecasting, which provides a more broad view assumption of where we think we're going to end the fiscal year. So this report will always be based on known variables as of the time of the report. The long range forecast is a larger risk assessment and probability of how the year will end up based on trends and what we're seeing kind of at the macro level. So I say that to say that, this is where we are right now at the halfway mark of FY25. And then when you see the forecast, you'll see where we ultimately think we're going to land at the end of this year and the 5-year horizon. So happy to answer.
When do we have the conversation about salaries and specifically board salaries?
During the budget process.
Okay.
Yep.
And do we have any other questions from the floor?
Well, I'm assuming, are we going to go into the pseudo-weighted formula, or are we just going to stay on the general numbers?
So the WSF report is on here as well. That
I
was the
see
other
that.
piece of this. So the WSF report's included. We've expended $12 million year to date as of the date of this report. And then the available budget. Now we don't encumber salaries in this fund. So we're looking right now at just under $4 million in remaining, and we're working with the schools to come up with some creative ways to employ programs in the last half of the year, including that tutoring program that I mentioned earlier, so that they have resources to be able to get creative, especially where they've had vacancies throughout the year and have some additional funds available.
But when I look at your report, the way you've got it, if I did my math correct, we're at 62% still remaining.
So that's the total amount unspent. If you were to encumber the salaries for positions that are filled and subtract that out, so that the encumbrances on this report are only for purchase services, it's not for salaries and benefits. So if you include the salaries in that, the number is just under 4 million remaining.
4
Yes, sir.
million.
Mhm.
So stalls million. I mean, stall has over 1 million.
As of unspent, but if you were to add the encumbered into that, they have less than 200,000. And again, they have an opportunity through today. Actually, the schools were given a chance to reopen their plans and to submit amendments to do other things for the last half of the year with their remaining funds, especially if they had let's say they had somebody resign from a position in November, and there's been some salaries that have accrued that have been lapsing. That's an opportunity for them to do that. And I've talked about this before, but the reason we don't encumber on this report for salaries and benefits, we have so many positions that are split funded between different funding sources. So you might have a 0.5 WSF and a 0.5 some other source. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't including encumbrances tied to, a position that was funded elsewhere when this report rolled up, because it's so unique, this type of funding and how the positions came together in the plans.
Any more progress
So,
on being able to color code this to make it easier to see? Or is somebody working on it?
I don't have anything further that's possible. Again, because these schools are coded by constituent district. The only thing I could do literally is essentially take a highlighter and just highlight over each one and say these are the overlapping council districts essentially. But unless we recoded the locations to have some identifier that showed them as, like, I don't know.
Highlighting would be great. It would give a visual break in the information that would make it easier to process.
Noted.
eh, eh,
I don't know that I have a way to do that digitally.
Because of the program that it's
Yeah,
written.
it's just essentially like an HTML type situation, and so it's relying on the uniqueness of the data. That's why I mentioned, like, in the case of Mount Pleasant Academy, it's in Council District 2, and it's in constituent district 2, right? But in the case of St. John's, it's in District 9 and constituent and County Council 8. So there's these, there's not an identifier that would say that that one's in this council district versus this constituent district. We would actually have to go through and recode or put like a, 8. I don't even know if we have that number of characters available, but this is tied to our financial system. So that location is what's called the cost center in the financial system.
So I'm not asking about the numbers there, changing your code, just for each council district,
Mhm.
giving it a colored highlight. It just would help break it up a little bit.
And that's what I'm saying, that this is essentially, it's an export report, and the data, it knows what this is based on that 4-digit number.
And there's not a way to transfer this over to like Excel or something like that, to present so that we can break that information up.
I guess we could copy paste it into Excel, and then, I mean, you'd have to manually highlight each one. This report, it runs through what's called our SQL service. It's it's internal system that Business Intelligence built. So I can go in and actually run the report in real time and look at it.
Add a sheet to this so we can kind of get an idea of where each thing falls in terms of representation. We'll look into it. Yeah. Okay. All right, Ms. Stamp.
I'm still struggling because at this point in February, we've spent $12.5 million out of our accounts. But you're saying that we really only have 4 million of the 33 left over that hasn't been accounted for. So the numbers don't make sense with, you're going to go your salaries from here, and we're only talking 3 months, and we've been operating for what, 7 months?
So
I just I
Well-
love the concept, but when I look at the real numbers,
this is as of January 15th. So that includes approximately half of the year. Of course, all of these positions were new for the most part, and so their first check didn't go out until August 15th, if I'm not mistaken. So there was, a couple, checks that didn't happen in July in this particular fiscal year. And then, of course, because we spread them out over 12 months, they'll continue to get paid through the June 30 check, and then there'll be an accrual. So when we look at the encumbering internally, we're estimating that the year end at this point in time would be 29 million, and then we'd have just under $4 million left over. And so we've shown the schools at the granular level, like we've had meetings with each school and said, you have $218,000 unencumbered available because this particular position was vacant for 4 months and accrued a balance of $28,000. And then this was unallocated in your plan. What do you want to do with that 218,000 between now and the end of the year? And we gave them a month and a half to submit additional, plans that they could do between now and the end of the year, which of course, at this point, hiring additional staff is not really an option. So it comes down to, do you want to do tutoring? Do you want to provide incentives? Are there different types of training and other development that can be provided, to the teachers, or things that can be provided to the students? And so once those new plans are rolled in February, based on, I think today is the deadline, then we should see that number start to tick down a little bit as more and more of those funds are encumbered, getting closer to the end of the year.
because when I look at West Ashley High School and I look at Wando, they're on track to what I would expect. But I don't want to get into a situation with this to where we're spending money just to spend money.
So you don't
They
have to, please don't be, I understand why you're concerned, but please don't be overly concerned, because we've met with principals, associates have these real-time trackers. Mr. Prentice is meeting with them around the clock. As part of the mid-year action planning process, principals were required to discuss with associates how they were planning to use the remainder of their funds in some of the ways that they discussed perhaps the week before with Margarita Rosa, who was here, as you know, from Georgetown. And so we are not overly concerned about expending the funds in ways that are thoughtful for kids. In fact, just yesterday, Mr. Prentice denied a WSF request that we felt violated one of the guardrails. So we're keeping close eye on the funds, how they're being spent, ensuring that they continue to comply with the purposes for which they were assigned. We know we're a little bit underneath where we should be for mid-year spending, but like you suggested, we don't want people to spend just to spend, and we want the process to be linked to student outcomes and thoughtful planning.
And I agree, this is the first year, and I commend you because I think being 4 million that close to, the 33, that's pretty good. It shows that there was some pretty good planning in, September, August, when everybody did all of this. So the principals need to be commended for that. But like I said, and I'm glad to hear that, the guardrails are being applied to where you actually turn something down. But it just, when I look at the numbers and I see 12 million is what we encumbered to January, and I'm going like,
We know
Wait a minute.
we know it appears alarming. We discussed it in cabinet.
Right.
It's a sort of a standing item that comes up as part of Mr. Prentice's weekly updates to us. And he brought it to us as a matter of concern, to be quite frank, but we've sort of course corrected to ensure that our principals are aware, our associates are aware, and we're tracking progress as needed.
Was there anything else? All right, with that, we'll move on to 3D. Capital Projects Report. Ms. Costello?
Thank you very much and good afternoon. I'd like to present the December Capital Projects Report. Our revenue collections were up 564,000 this month, which is over our 2% projection. Our expenditures for the month, beginning with the 2010 through 2016 program, were $29,000. The 2017 through 2022 program, $1.8 million. The 2023 through 2028 program, $20.1 million. The 2023 through 2028 program, funded with long-term debt, was $9.1 million. Our fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 24 program is in the final wrap-up. The fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 25 is nearing completion. And we will be bringing the project list for the fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 26 to you all and the board in March. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Grabowski, I'll go ahead and start with you.
I love this.
Ms. Stamp, did you have anything? Mr. Duke?
No.
Mr. Garrett Mr. Garrett, did you have any questions about the capital projects report? All right. We'll move on to item 3E, long-range financial forecast updates. Mr. Prentice.
All right, so if you remember during the budget process last year, we started doing a more detailed long-range forecast with the promise that for FY26 and onward, we would develop a more robust model. What we did last year was more of a composite report of data in Excel that looked at some trends between FY25 and FY29, but it didn't have the breadth of statistical analysis and historical trends behind it that we wanted. So we have launched a new program that we're administering now in-house that looks at years and years of historical data, whether it be assessed value, population, median income. I mean, there's all sorts of statistics in there. And then we look at all of our revenue categories and all of our expenditures, and there's correlations that look at the statistical relevance of some of the drivers of, those forecasts over time and the historical trends. We know if we increase the millage rate that the revenues may have increased more than the assessed value did in a particular year because of that millage rate increase. And so it's really considering, all of the factors that we want to consider in a long range forecast. Obviously teacher pay on the expenditure side increased by $8,000 this fiscal year. The prior fiscal year was by 5, and then something different prior to that. And so we can influence the model in, ways based on things that we know that we need to do, or we can project things based on, the trends that we've experienced, whether it be with, utilities or some of the consumables and operating costs that we see throughout the district. So this is the first round of the FY 25 through 29 model revised, which includes year-end projections for FY25, budgetary projections for FY26, and then the continuation of the model out through 2029. Once we get into FY26, we'll add the 2030 slot and continue to look at the 5-year horizon. But so far, what I'll point out on this is that you have in the first column of the first chart the 2024 audited actuals. And so in 2024, we saw increase to fund balance of $45.3 million. And if you remember from last year's budget, our fund balance grew to approximately $231 million, which is substantially in excess of both our local policy and state policy for school districts' fund balance requirements. And so we wanted to thoughtfully balance the budget for FY25 with a mixture of growth in the tax base, the use of some sustainable fund balance, particularly to help us launch WSF and provide for the increase in teacher pay, and then to taper off of that over the next few years as we spent down some of that fund balance to a reasonable level and maintained it in compliance with both state policy and our policy. So for FY25, we budgeted a use of fund balance of $63 million. And so that was how we balanced the $847 million budget. Our projections at this point in time is that we're only going to use 36 of that $63 million budgeted use of fund balance. So that's good news for this fiscal year based on a combination of revenues coming in higher than budget and expenditures coming in under budget. And that obviously influences the model out over the 5-year horizon because we're using less than we anticipated based on our performance this year. And that helps us out in those out years. For FY26, what I'll point out is that while we're showing a use of fund balance of just over $6 million in FY26, what we budget will be higher than that in terms of a use of fund balance, but where we ultimately land will be lower based on the actual long-range projection that we're employing based on the historical trends that we've seen. So if you look at the solid lines where it says baseline, that's the budget component, and then the dashed lines are the likely outcome. So for the baseline revenues in FY26, we're projecting a budget of $863 million. And then for the actual projection, we're projecting to come in around $4 million higher than that based on some of the conservatism that we employ and changes in the tax base between the time at which we analyze our projections and the point that the taxes are actually levied. On the expenditure side, we're projecting a budget of approximately $896 million. So the difference between the revenue number and the expenditure number would be the use of fund balance, but then actually ending the year with expenditures of $873 million, thus using approximately $6 million in fund balance. So we feel good about that based on all the things that we've shared so far, because obviously we've announced teacher compensation of approximately $65,000 at the base, with $4,000 an increase across all steps on the scale, maintaining 100% of market for our classified staff and a number of other programs, such as expanding our childhood daycare for employees and reducing the cost of Kaleidoscope for employees. So all of that's included in this forecast, along with things like our increase in our transportation contract with First Student and all those known variables and forecasted variables that we expect will be a part of the budget. So looking out to 27, 28, and 29, you can see that we're still using between $6 and $7 million a year of fund balance each of those years. But that by the time you get to 2029, you still have $168 million in fund balance, which will exceed the policy requirement for fund balance by about $20 million. So that's a good trend for us because all of this assumes that our millage levy is the same. So we're anticipating that our 145.2 mil levy for operating remains flat and our 23 mil levy for debt remains flat across that horizon, so that we won't have a tax increase to be able to balance these budgets, and that we can use a little bit of our fund balance along the way, because we just are carrying more than what we really need to carry. And that's kind of the sustainable, right thing to do when you have, an excess of fund balance over what we truly need for cash flows and state policy and our local policy. So the only other thing I'll point out is that trend line on the fund balance graph, the dotted line that runs through those bars. That is what the fund balance would be if we went by the budget. Because the budget and the actual, obviously can be two very different numbers depending on performance each year. And so the projections result us in the 168 million. The trend line would be if you went based on the probable budget each of those fiscal years. And obviously, each year that we close, we know what our actual results were, and that becomes cemented in the model as an actual. And then we have estimates and, continue to march that out over the next 5 years. So when you saw this last time, 2024 was a projection. Now 2024 is an actual. 2025 was a budget. Now 2025 is an estimate. 2026 was on the long range horizon, and now it's, on the kind of batter up tee for the next fiscal year to come into focus. So this is going to continue to evolve, and what you see every single month or every time we share it will continuously change as assumptions and inputs and variables change. But we want to be able to give this to the board on a regular basis now that we have this model to show, on a 5-year horizon, what's likely going to happen instead of making decisions in a vacuum or having any surprises. So I share this with you now to say that when we get into budget workshops between March and May, that we'll continue to refine it and show, the actual budgetary considerations and how, the budget influences the model. And then it also has a piece to it that allows for us to do some sensitivity analysis. So if somebody asks a question like, what if we were to add, another $8,000 in pay across the scale for teachers, how much would that cost and what would that do over the 5-year horizon? I can tell you, that's what it does to the forecast, how much it impacts your fund balance or how much you would have to increase your taxes to be able to do it very quickly. So it'll aid us in making good decisions and hopefully show the board that the decisions that we've made in bringing forth a balanced budget proposal are the reasonable approach to how we want to handle our finances for the upcoming year. But it's very detailed. I mean, this file takes a minute to open in Excel because there's so much behind it in terms of the formulas and the forecasting assumptions.
So that's what I was going to ask you about. I mean, I tracked pretty much everything you said, even though you said a lot very quickly. But do you have like a basic analysis, kind of like what you just said, that explains these two graphs? Because I think people who aren't necessarily used to digging into these types of graphs and figures, they may not understand what information this is conveying. So is there a way that you could maybe simplify that analysis and maybe send it to the board?
So we'll, like I said, we'll expand upon this as we get into budget workshops. This is the first output that we've seen from this model, and just wanted to give the committee an opportunity, because typically at this point in the year, what's been shared is kind of a revenue forecast for the upcoming year, and that's really it. So this is us taking the revenue forecast and then adding in, the 5-year expenditure summary and all those other components to show a full balance picture. But as we get into the budget process, we'll add some context to this. There's actually some other charts that we're going to produce and some narrative text. So this will actually become kind of almost like a, economic analysis report for the state of the district's finances that we can present like on a quarterly basis. But we're working, building and growing as we go.
And so will you explain like on the top graph, the variance? You've got variance and then variance base. Can you explain those variances?
So the variance is the difference between revenues and expenditures. So in the case of 2024, you see the black line, which is solid because that was the actual experience. Those were the revenues, and the red line is the expenditures. And then the shaded area is just that $45 million variance. So we contributed to our fund balance that amount. In 2025, you can see that the red solid line, which was the budget for expenditures, was higher than the dashed red line, which is the actual expected year end. And then the black line solid was the budget, and the black line is just slightly higher than that on revenues is, where the variance comes into play. So that blue shaded area there, because the lines have flipped, represents a use of $36 million of fund balance, which is less than what we budgeted.
Okay, so that the reason the red line is above the black line is intentional.
Correct.
Okay.
Because we budgeted $63 million in fund balance. Yep. And we're only projecting to use 36. So
Okay.
and that's what I say, when we get into the more narrative detail on this, we'll provide some contextual backup onto why things are the way they are. I just wanted to give the committee and ultimately the board something early before we get into the budget process, and then we'll expand upon it as we get further down. We didn't end up doing this last year until late April, early May for the first time. And so I just wanted to update it just to kind of show where we were at this point. And then again, we'll refine it every month as we go through the budget process and those year-end projections get tighter and tighter.
Okay, Mr. Grabowski.
So in looking at this model that you've produced, is this including some of the ideas as to what are going to be proposed at the budget, like the 6,500 for the teachers? Is that already included in what you're looking at?
It is. And it was actually in reality, it was in last year's model too, because we had anticipated that we would do a $8,000, $7,500, $8,000 jump in 25. We had said 4,000 in 26. And then, the cost of that 4,000 was less than we anticipated. So that's how we were able to do that banded step 1 through 5 that was talked about to get the starting pay up to 65,000 within that same amount for salaries that we had forecast. And then for 27, 28, and 29, it starts to normalize and it starts to tie to the projected CPI. And so whatever the CPI projection is in the model is what it does to the salaries and benefits cost.
So the main driver of this is obviously salaries.
That's absolutely. I mean, our general operating fund salaries are close to 600 million of an $847 million budget. So it's, largely salaries and then, operating and maintenance in terms of, utility cost and all of our custodial, janitorial, contracted transportation. Those make up a big portion as well.
So in looking at the various assumptions that you've obviously built into the models, are we going to be able to, like enrollment, we've gotten our 45-day report. So obviously there's, you're starting to see some flattening, some increasing in different areas, but nevertheless, this is a serious assumption that's being rolled out over 5 years.
So we're seeing, and we've included this as well, based on enrollment projections, we're seeing an increase of about 54 full-time employees in FY26. That's a net number of decreases and increases across the system. So some are decreasing, some are increasing, but the net increase is about 54 FTEs. And on a law of average salaries, that's about $5.6 million in cost that's included. So we've projected and forecast all of that as well. And then again, this model actually looks at a 10-year prior history of enrollment and allocations at every single school, and then ties in the statistical component of, what might have been driving that. And then we can also bring in the planning and real estate, actual projections each year and drop that data in and compare against what our long range forecast thought it would be. So it does a lot of deep diving in terms, I can see, what does it think allocations are going to be at Whitesides in 2027 based on, what our current allocation formulas are and what the average salary for that position is. And it drives all that out.
How are you handling the unfunded liabilities like pension funds and all that?
So as it looks right in terms of balance in the budget, we're looking at using a small amount of fund balance over the next 5 years with a tax levy that's neutral. Fortunately, the pension increases have stopped. So we're not going to see the 1% increase like we've seen over the last 5 years. So it, will only be tied to an increase in salaries and benefits as a percentage. It won't go up tied to salaries and benefits and increase 1% on top of that. And so that assumption's been included as well.
I love that.
That hurt for a while.
You really believe that the pension fund, that it stopped?
Well, that was, the 5-year plan that was done back in 2016. And there obviously is a chance that they could find themselves in a situation again where they need to increase the percentage, but I don't think over the 5-year horizon that we'll see
just
that
don't see
employer
how
contribution go up.
I bring this up because I think you need to be cautious on that, only because when you look at the amount that we have, and I know we took it into account, but when you look at the amount that the salaries have gone up in the last 3 years, and the force it's going to put on the pension fund, the unfunded portion of that. Because when I've got teachers that have been teaching 30 years, 40 years, whatever, and I've increased their salary by, double digits, there's an unfunded section of that pension.
Absolutely. And so we look at that 2 separate ways. We report in our audit and our financial statements what that unfunded liability is, which of course is borne to the state. And then we also look at our OPEB liability, which is our liability, on the on the PIBA side for health insurance. So there's two numbers. There's the OPEB and then there's the retirement component to it. And we track those. We look at ratios on that. Fortunately, that number's come down a little bit from a ratio standpoint, which of course has a lot to do with the increased contribution rates that have been implemented. But we report that information, but it's not the liability of the district legally based on the system.
Right. The last thing is when we get into this budget, start looking at it, because now we're getting into a period past the end of the 1%. I mean, the sales tax. I mean, it ends in 2028. So we're now looking at numbers that are going into 2029. So how are you addressing the assumption that we may not have that sales tax?
That sales tax needs to pass. And I'm saying that, a little bit in jest, but also if you think about not just the staffing of implementing capital projects and implementing technology refresh and capital maintenance, it wouldn't be on the GOF. We would have to actually start issuing GO bonds again to fund those projects. And so that doesn't fit this model, but we know what our capacity is in terms of 8% limit with assessed value. And that obviously between now and 2031 is anticipated to float to zero. But if we didn't get a sales tax, our recourse towards funding these programs would be issuing GO bonds, amortizing those bonds over 10 plus years, and using debt millage levy to support them.
And I think it's very important that this message starts getting out now, because this is the first opportunity that we've had that you've looked at years that are outside the 2028 sales tax funding revenues. So it's something, I'm glad we're having this discussion, but this is critical.
I think we did
Yep.
discuss briefly at one of the meetings that about having a referendum for the
But what I'm
28.
saying is this is now.
No, I
seen.
Absolutely.
This,
And that-
this
Same.
model is now going into that period
Yeah.
where that 2028 is not there.
So we,
We're basing it on an assumption that it is there.
well, in different fund though. So if we didn't have the sales tax, the impacts would largely be to the debt fund, not the GOF. And so our debt millage has been steadily declining, over time. And so, we know what our debt levy will yield in 2028, 2029. But if we had to, face a reality of not having a sales tax, we would have to raise ad valorem property taxes on the debt side to offset the ongoing capital needs. And I think the conversation right now is the 7-year 1 cent sales tax yields about $1 million in the phase 5 program, $1 billion, over the phase 5 program. And our 8% debt limit is less than 500 million. So capacity limiting significantly. And we would have to get very creative in terms of how we approach technology and capital infrastructure construction and replacement. But again, no impact to the GOF model. It would be on that debt side. And we do have a trend on that in terms of the revenue and the debt service, that we currently have obligations for. But the assumption is that, the meetings that are starting now and scoping out what the, 2029 through 2035 referendum would look like, would yield a favorable result in 2026. So we would still have a couple of years of reaction if for some reason it was not successful.
And I'm glad, because I know we're going in the budget cycle, we'll be going into this much deeper, but I'm glad, I'm really very appreciative that you've got this model out this soon. I mean, this early in the cycle, I shouldn't say.
And, not so much to be, shared in this.
Especially
forum.
considering what the district has announced to the world. As
Absolutely.
speakers.
I wouldn't have gone to the superintendent and our chief of HR and said, I'm comfortable with this if the model didn't support the direction that we were trying to go.
That's a great point to bring up though.
On the back end, we're not just looking at the GOF. We're working on one for our food service fund. Nutrition services is about a $40 million a year special revenue fund. And we want to know what the long range sustainability of that fund is, because if that fund bottoms out, it's going to rely on the GOF. And so there's other things that we're considering at the point at which they become relevant to the GOF. Then, materially, we're going to start to talk about that as well, but no other impacts known at this point in time. But do know that on the back end, there's a lot more that goes into looking at all of this to make sure that, budgetarily we're making good decisions.
Okay. I'd like to move on to items.
F.
Oh yeah, 3F, audit.
The staff.
I just get back to seeing the plan, following the plan, for us to track the plan to make sure that when the next year's audit comes up, because they're gonna have to present the corrective action that they actually did to the auditors. So we should know before it gets to them that, yes, these things were done. So I think it's our job to track the progress of the corrective action plan that's been put in place. That's the bottom line.
And I agree.
Mr. Princess.
So on the Financial Services Division page of the website, if you go to the FY 2024 audit under accounting, it's on page 147 of the PDF document. That's section 2 of the compliance report, which is the current year financial statement findings. There were 2 of them. One of which was, let's see here. Should get the right page here. Here we go. Yep. One of which was the closeout issue that I mentioned with the posting of Medicaid payments. So Medicaid payments were coming in. There was some staff transition. They were posting those payments essentially as revenue, and Medicaid is obviously a reimbursement. So there's a way that those need to be coded to ensure that they're tracked properly. So we had to make some journal entries at the end of the year to account for those errors that were made. And that was made prior to the issuance of the financial statements. And so while we agreed with the finding from the audit firm, staff in the budget office and in financial services in general put in an update to the SOP to make sure that there is specific annotation that Medicaid payments are coded as reimbursement. And there was some staff training that was taken into consideration to make sure that the staff that made those postings was aware of the corrective action and the impact of those decisions, since they just simply weren't aware of what they needed to do. So that's been corrected. We've monitored it's being handled properly in FY 2025. And so, there's no anticipated recurrence of that finding in the future. The other one, which is tied to federal awards program audit, which is a component of the financial statement audit, is the $10,000 non-compete exemption pertaining to ESSER. So there was approximately $900,000 in procurements that were made under ESSER that exceeded the $10,000 per procurement threshold where a non-compete form was not completed. And so we did have a staff termination that happened. There's been retraining. There's been implementation of a new SOP between procurement and the Office of Federal Programs, since they administer those federal funds where this is applicable, to where any procurement, even if it's an exemption in our local code that exceeds $10,000, the requester submits the 2-page form to that office, which then goes to myself, the Director of Procurement, and then ultimately the State Department of Education for approval. And then when and only when that form comes back authorized, can the requisition be converted to a purchase order and the goods and services be procured. And so that keeps us compliant with that federal regulation that exceeds our local code, where even though it might be an exemption, it's not from a federal viewpoint. In the case of ESSER, fiscally, we were able to reimburse those particular procurements with general operating fund. And then we were able to use those ESSER dollars that were freed up to cover some eligible salaries in the general operating fund. So we just swapped the $900,000 to where there was not actually an actual operating impact or fiscal impact as a result of it. But again, that particular one, we caught that before the end of the fiscal year, and that corrective action was done before June 30th in order to help us facilitate the closeout of ESSER. But because of the materiality of the amount pertaining to our overall financials, even though it was a self-report, the auditors had to report that on the financial statement as a finding in compliance with federal law, since it was an audit of a federal program. But those were the 2 findings. And again, those trailing pages on the audited financial statements include both the finding, management's comments, and the corrective action plan. And in the case of both of these 2, compliance is in place, and we don't anticipate any further issues there.
So the SOPs that you referenced, where can those be sent? I don't know if everybody wants it, but I'd like to see the SOPs that you put in place to correct these.
Okay.
As part of this corrective action. But that's key.
And you can provide that information, Mr. Prentice.
It'll be a follow-up item after the meeting. offline.
Be glad to provide that in the board brief and share that with the audit and finance members as soon as time
Yeah,
permits.
Great, right, thank you. Anything else, Ms. Stamp?
Where would it? Does it
They're
come
gonna
from?
send it to you. Mhm.
So we'll make sure it's sent in this week's or next week's board brief as soon as we can get it together, Mrs. Stamp, and then it'll go directly to the audit and finance via Tanisha, an email from Tanisha.
Satisfied? Is that good?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so then, just if, Ms. Stamp, if there is a question after you read it, and you need me to make sure it's on the agenda, please email.
Okay.
Okay. And so items number 4, convene into executive session. Can I have a motion?
So move.
Second? All right, we're in executive session. Shall we step into the back because we're discussing people? Okay.
I think it's easier for us to step in back.
Yeah, we'll step it back.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Really, it's so much easier.
Give me a chance for a potty break too.
You go with that? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's for everybody.
All right.
Nice chat. Oh, you.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
So it's usually this meeting. First came in, you put that on first.
Keep trying to knock me down.
complete.
vote.
So are you gonna take a vote?
If they bring it up, the motion.
Actually, according to the charter, we don't, but,
Fine, but just go on record that I,
It's an appointment.
it's an appointment. It's not something we vote on.
Right.
Okay, and then the next item is 8A.
Right, Daniel, or am I missing?
So this is the Citizens Oversight Steering Committee, it's ad hoc and there's not, a direct approval or pass through to the board necessarily. So at the recommendation of the committee, the chairman makes the decision to appoint.
Board, right.
Versus with the audit and finance, at the recommendation of the committee, the full board has to make the decision to appoint. Yeah.
So, items 8A, upcoming meetings, we'll have our next audit and finance, March the 4th. And